Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City University of New York. Today, we're looking at post-war Italian cinema, and in fact, we're looking at a film from 1953 that's an anthology film called Love in the City. It has some big names attached to it. Cesare Zavattini was one of the producers, Federico Fellini, Michelangelo Antonioni, and some others. It's 6 episodes in 2 hours. We'll be talking about the distinctiveness of those episodes and a number of other things after today's screening. It'll be our pleasure to have returning to City Cinematheque Professor Gaetana Marrone of Princeton University. Now, take this opportunity to visit Italy in the early 1950s in Love in the City. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this rare opportunity to see a film from Italy in 1953, Love in the City, with 6 very distinct episodes, very different styles, very different approaches. There's a lot to talk about here, and we've got about 30 minutes to do it, and it's an absolute pleasure to have back on City Cinematheque our good friend, Professor Gaetana Marrone of Princeton University. Gaetana teaches Italian film and literature of the 20th and 21st century, and I'm delighted to say that in 2020 she published a masterful study of Francesco Rosi, the cinema of Francesco Rosi, Oxford University Press, a book that's already won some distinction and prize. So welcome here. We're not going to be talking about Rosi so much today, but about his set and about a lot of people of the same generation. So
I'm happy to be back, especially after the break of the COVID that slowed down, in particularly the film activities.
Absolutely, and we are taping this in 2021 after a hiatus of a bit in being able to do that. So let's just talk about this Italian moment of neorealism, the earlier films, you know, like Bicycle Thieves, Rome Open City. They're 5 years or so behind. So Cesare Zavattini is the major screenwriter. He's a major, he's a major theorist of it. So what's this moment and what's this project about?
Well, Italian neorealism has today still been the key moment of Italian film history. However, I'm very happy that you chose a film that has rarely been covered in recent times and that is today considered Zavattini's experiment that sealed the end of neorealism. Because Zavattini, who always believed that the content engendered the style. And with Visconti, Rossellini, and De Sica, he was particularly close to De Sica. He believed there is an ethical commitment of the filmmaker. But with this experiment that was born out of his new ideas presented at the 53 neorealist convention, where he said and announced that he was going to bring neorealism to the far end. So he found 3 producers, among them also Marco Ferreri at the beginning, and gathered a few of the friends of the film community, and the announcement was, as it has been reported by Fellini, by all the others, that what we were told, we have no money to pay you, we are founding a film journal that instead of being written with pen and ink, it will be written with a camera and a lens. You will be given a topic and you will be free to do an episode. But you have a great advantage. We are giving you Di Venanzo, Gianni Di Venanzo. And everybody accepted.
Okay.
And everybody then went independently, except for Antonioni, who declared later on, well, I chose my topic, suicide, because I was told that maybe you can do suicides. Well, probably they single out Antonioni as somebody who was engaging in that kind of female journey.
Right.
Female journey. And they all went and filmed, and the length of each episode is very diverse.
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes from 11 minutes. The one that was supposed to take half of the film was the story of Caterina,
right.
By Maselli, where Zavattini then chose to basically co-direct, because that was a story that...
the story of the unwed mother.
Unwed mother.
Right, from Sicily.
And then it was, of course, cut down to 22 minutes. But the principle was that the facts would speak by themselves. They will be not actors, but the real people reenacting their stories. Of course, the episode by Fellini has two lead actors.
Right.
And there are some coordinations. It's not raw reality. It was supposed initially to be a theme on telling the truth.
Okay.
But then they thought the censorship could block that kind
Telling
of
the truth?
theme. Yes, to block that theme. So they chose Love in the City, although the censorship intervened. When the film was distributed abroad in '57, the first episode on prostitution was cut out.
Right.
And we are referring that at the same time, basically in '49, the Minister of Cultural Affairs at the time, Giulio Andreotti, who would then become one of the leading players in Italian politics for decades to come, had signed a new decree, the Andreotti Law. The Andreotti Law was intended, above all, to recoup the Italian film industry, because in the years of neorealism, the production has slanted down to 54 films a year, while foreign films, the import of foreign films had escalated to over 300, most being American films.
Right.
So Andreotti felt that, number one, these neorealist films were giving a bad portrait of Italy abroad.
Right.
Therefore, he had to promote films that would recuperate the image of Italy. And so censorship was established pre-shooting.
Of this film.
Right. Of any film.
Right. Okay.
After '49, which meant in order to have the producer to have funding from a bank or any other source, the script had to be approved by the censors.
Okay.
And so if the script was not approved, then there would be no financing.
Right.
And so, but by '54, the Andreotti Law brought the production of Italian films to over 200, while the foreign imports, in particular the American ones, has slanted down to about 100. So in a way, this film, which went through pre-censorship, will be part of the '50s, where neorealism, as we now studied, we have our students studied, became pink neorealismo rosa, pink neorealism. The stories are mostly socially engaged with the local classes, but they are love stories. These are the films where we find that De Sica with Sofia Loren,
yes, yeah.
Gina Lollobrigida, so the audience
all beauty prize winners.
Yes, would go home reassured that actually working class could still dream, could still connect to the beautiful stars on the screen.
So there's a kind of loop between the so-called white telephone movies of the 30s under the fascists that convinced people that Italy was really modern and prosperous, and then this kind of reassurance that the working class is on the right path, you know, in the post-war era.
Exactly. So it was no longer the everyday guy, as in the films of neorealism,
right.
that we're facing the aftermath of the war, of 20 years of fascism. But now they would begin to work, the love would end up in a wedding and so on. So it was reassuring.
Well, you know, I have to say that there is, to take it from a rather different angle, but there is something that is prophetic about this film in the sense that the whole idea of the film inquiry in this way really translates pretty well into the whole idea of the new digital sphere in which journalism is no longer restricted to writing, and that you have these multiple platforms, and that you can do your inquiry in any kind of way, and you can go out and you can film and you can edit and do all of that. So that there's a way in which in terms of the way it was to treat reality, it's looking back towards those roots in neorealism. But actually, this impulse to send out 6 film reporters in a certain kind of way translates into where journalism has gone, and certainly certain kinds of independent journalism have gone in the 21st century.
Yes, definitely, because the notion of film inquiry, the word he will use for this film journal,
right.
Or film lampo, flash film, or film incontro, film encounter, film pedinamento, where you basically follow. Rossellini will be speaking of following a human being with love through a slice of life, with an ethical commitment. Visconti will then say that the human being has to fill the frame, while De Sica will bring in poetry.
Right.
That neorealism is not just a raw reality, what he will say, the literal realism as ugly reality. Our neorealist films have poetry, because there is this great sense of aesthetic and human participation on behalf of the filmmaker. But going back to what you just said about this film that has a voiceover constantly leading
right.
the audience from episode to episode, will begin with an inquiry, and we have Lizzani and Antonioni. Lizzani that begins with love by hire,
right.
Which is really a heartbreaking episode, as he follows these women that have no family support, come from poverty, and at the end of the war, they also have a personal story of abandonment, also
right.
from the guys that they met with great love and enthusiasm. And Zavattini will say that actually these are stories of abandonment, because what brought together all these episodes at the end, which is very touching for a modern audience,
right.
is you have a portrayal of women that is mirroring the male side of Italian society in a very problematic way.
Absolutely.
These guys abandon the girl when she gets pregnant. They use the girls and they move on. It's really, it makes you reflect on how the war, 20 years of fascism, may have influenced the psyche of the Italian male, because these were not the stories of the early films where there was a code of honor, but this is not by chance, basically was not scripted.
Right. Well, if we were to use the phrase that is now kind of circulating in all of this, it's very interesting that there is this off-screen portrait of toxic masculinity.
Yes.
You know, and we get it through, but here's such a key point, that we get it through the experience of the women and through abandonment. And you know, the argument was made at a certain point that the Fellini episode, you know, in certain sense, it's a very interesting episode, but it doesn't fit in the same way that others. I would also say, no, it's when you get the manipulator on screen, and he ends up abandoning her just as she has been abandoned before. I mean, she ends up, you know, on the street again, left at the end, and the car. And so you get this direct portrait of somebody who's supposed to be on her side, but ends up duplicating in his own way.
However, I think the Fellini episode, which is about, of course, it's acted by Cifariello, that then became one of the top actors of the 50s. But the Fellini episode was one of the most admired, including Aristarco, that basically dismissed this film as a failed experiment.
Right.
And Zavattini himself later on declared that there was a basic mistake, and the mistake was to get all these artists and let them loose. They should have been coordinated. But the Fellini episodes, reading it within the Fellini's career, can be also viewed like an inquiry. We have an investigative reporter that is going to contact a marriage agency to see while women accept to match. Of course, at the time was not, today is a common norm. Right. Nobody will question it. But at the time, for a woman, it was quite rare. And he invents the story of a friend who is plagued with the disease, is a werewolf with a full moon. And the agency finds this girl coming from utter poverty. Absolutely. That begins to say not only that she can do it because she's poor. In fact, the journalist insists, saying, but are you sure? You're a nice person. Why would you want to marry? But this werewolf guy is very rich. But she adds at the end, which I think is very Fellini, that she feels she's going to love the guy, because the question she asks, is he a violent guy? Right. That is, and I think io mi affezionerò, I will get fond of him. Right. And that's when he chooses to abandon her with she becomes a little spot in Piazza di Cinquecento, and he says, no, 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 good luck. But that's Fellini, because Fellini always has that moment of connection. I see
he understands.
What will come
Right.
with La Strada, with the Nights of Faberia, more than the films he had done before, the White Chic and so on. While the other episodes can be either raw or with Antonioni on suicidal women, who then declared, well, I was really interested in getting these women on camera, but then except a couple, I began rejecting them. I felt that they loved to be on camera. I felt somehow that they did it for the money. And I think Antonioni missed the point. Of course, the last woman on camera will say, I would like to be an actress. Right. And he closes with that sentence. But I feel that putting up a mask, a facade, is part of the trauma of somebody who was abandoned. And then has to recount the story, and has not gone through therapy and so on. So putting up a mask is not really to have become an actor telling a story that's no longer yours.
Well, I think you just put together something that's a thread that crosses the film, and that is, what is the ethics of this filmmaking? Because a number of the episodes, pose this question of, okay, if I follow this method, I'm trying to reveal the truth about a social situation, historical situation, but is my method a really does my method raise ethical questions? So, for example, as an issue of discussion and debate, the episode of Caterina.
Yes.
So you have a young woman, and so the question is, what are the ethics of having her reproduce this? Is that, can you argue that that's exploitative, in some way? And obviously certain critics Sabatini obviously believed he was doing the right thing, and this was the way to get to it. But that doesn't mean the critical response was uniform in that way. The same thing with presenting testimonies of people who have committed suicide. That raises the same constitution. Or, if we want to leap forward, doing the kind of candid camera thing of putting a woman on the street and then capturing the responses of the men in the most, plainly close to comic episode.
Yes.
Of
that was the end relief of the film, but actually tells a level of immaturity. But many of those women were actresses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actresses, and the closing guy is actually Ferreri, Marco Ferreri. So basically, what I think eluded Zavattini, that these were really filmmakers with their own style. And his own idea was to be raw. Of course, they would find these events from newspapers,
right.
As we see at the end with Caterina, we see how the press had covered her case, but and it was the camera was simply going to report. What happened is everyone adopted a style. Antonioni uses a studio. As the suicidal women in a studio, silhouetted, even shows the grid on the screen. So, and it's so, and it's the lighting of Di Venanzo, the night where the prostitutes walk, the way the roads are lit. Those are the films of Antonioni. That is Sicily of Salvatore Giuliano.
Right.
In Rosi's film, the nights with the special lights being posted at the corners. So everyone worked with a style. And Fellini, the scene where the journalist is trying to find out the agency, and you go through corridors, and then you have the children leading. That's a typical Fellinian theme. So it becomes stylized.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up with the word stylized, and I think it's something that our viewers can think about how the stylization varies across across those films. So I hope you've enjoyed today's look at Italian post-war cinema. There'll be more in weeks to come. And I hope that you'll take this opportunity to find out more about CUNY TV. You can do that by looking at our website, www.cuny.tv. There you'll find more about City Cinematheque and the broad range of programming produced by City University Television. So think about that again, www.cuny.tv. Gaetana, always a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Great.
Great, the new series.
Okay, well, we're happy to be back and happy to be able to dip into the wealth of your knowledge about Italian cinema and Italian culture. And to all of you, thanks for joining us today, and I hope you return in coming weeks to City Cinematheque. Goodbye for now.